I wake before dawn, though I can't remember the last time I slept. My alarm isn't set. My body has learned its new rhythm, one of silent, unbroken wakefulness. I lie perfectly still beneath the blankets, staring at the ceilings, peeling paint, tracing its cracks like a secret map. The studio beyond my bedroom door hums with quiet energy, as if it breathes with me. Awaiting my first movement, I swing my legs off the bed and stand, feeling the chill of the hardwood floor through my bare feet. The house is steeped in stillness now. Creaks from the attic, no distant roar of traffic, no birdsong splitting the silence. If I concentrate, I can almost hear myself breathe, each inhale and exhale echoing down the long hallway. In the dim light of early morning, I pad toward the studio. My brushes line the shelf like a row of toothy predators, their bristles stiff with last night's pigment. In the center of the room sits my latest canvas blank, prepped, waiting. I touch its edge. The coarse linen is cool under my fingertips. I used to love this moment. The gentle anticipation before the first stroke, when anything seemed possible. Today, I feel only a nervous flutter in my chest. Something is off. I inhale the familiar scent of linseed oil and turpentine, but there's an odd temps in the air, an undercurrent of metal, like blood. I shrugged it off. My nose might be playing tricks on me. I walked the perimeter of the studio, my eyes drifting, past completed paintings stacked against the walls, landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces born of fever dreams. They all blur together now, save for one, the painting I finished a week ago. It hangs alone on an easel, spotlighted by a single lamp I keep on for the quiet hours. Even in darkness, it glows. The portrait shows a woman's face, her eyes half closed, lips parted as if to speak. I didn't model her on anyone real. Her expression is familiar but indefinable, like a distant memory or a half-remembered dream. I titled it The Whisper, but lately it feels like she's trying to tell me something. I approach that easel first. My reflection stretches across. The canvas in the lamp's glow, but I push it aside, focusing on every tiny detail. Her face is rendered in shades of grey and deep indigo. Her cheekbones catch the light in smears of silver. My hand trembles when I lift my brush, though I have no intention of altering her anymore. Instead, I touch the tip of the brush to the corner of my mouth, tasting the bristles. I can't recall why. I step back and the whole room seems to shift. The shadows grow longer. My heart races. I blink hard, trying to calm the whirl in my mind. There it is again, that faint scent of iron. I set the brush down and move to another painting or nocturnal forest seen alive with black pines and ominous moonlight. It was once my favorite work, but now it seems trivial, static. I study the trees, search for something I cannot name, and feel a quiet dread pool in the pit of my stomach. The silence presses on me, thick and heavy. It's as if the house itself conspires to trap me in this pale dawn. I pace, edges brushing against canvases, brushes, tubes of paint. I stop at the window overlooking the deserted street. Outside, the world slumbers under a gauzy mist that clings to the road. I inhale again, mist and rain. Maybe the metallic temps is gone. I turn back. The studio lights flicker just once, in a soft, stuttering blink. I freeze. My gaze darts across the room, searching for movement. Nothing shifts. My breath catches, then releases. My rational mind assures me that the wiring is faulty. It happens often in a house this old. I stride back to the easel and lift the lampshade, inspecting the socket. It's secure. The bulb is fine. I screw it gently, expecting a dull click, but instead it hums, brightening. The lamp's glow intensifies, illuminating every crack in the studio walls. My skin prickles under its glare. I step back, nearly tripping over a paint can. My palm slams into the cold metal, and a rivulet of pain shoots through my fingers. I squeeze my hand, tasting the coppery sting of blood in my mouth. I wipe it on my jeans and inspect the smear bright red, raw. My pulse pounds in my ears. Sink onto a stool, wrapping my hand in a scrap of canvas. My chest heaves. I bring the stump of fabric to my lips and inhale its musky scent. Then I notice a smear of red on the easel's wood-fresh, stark. I jerk upright. What? I peer at the smear. It's not my blood. It's thicker, darker like oil paint laced with something else. My mind spins. Did I knock over a tube? But this color doesn't match any tube in my collection. I flush with panic, eyes darting around the studio. I grip the canvas of the whisper and yank it free of the easel. The back is cold, bare of stretcher bars. Where the wooden frame should be, there's nothing, only a thin layer of linen stretched impossibly taut. My heart thuds. Why would I remove the frame? I never would. The painting itself feels impossibly heavy in my hands. I stare at the front. Her eyes are slightly wider now, as if she's startled or pleading. The silver smear along her cheek has become a streak of crimson that wasn't there before. My stomach twists. I drop the canvas onto the stool, stepping back. It jolts the wood, and the painting slides, hitting the floor with a dull thud. It lands face up, perfectly intact. I kneel, bracing myself on the cold floorboards, and press my palm to the surface. The linen is warm beneath my skin. My breath hitches. The crimson smear has shifted again. Now it cuts across her lips like a slash. No, I tell myself. My eyes sting. I lean closer, tracing the line with the tip of my finger. It feels wet. I jerk back, my foot connecting with the stool. Pain blooms in my shin. I scramble to my feet and sprint from the studio, slamming the door behind me. The corridor's silence greets me, less menacing but no less hollow. I lean against the wall, sliding down until I'm seated on the floor. I wrap my arms around my knees, head bowed. What's happening to me? I taste the copper of my own fear. My mind races. I'm losing it now. I have lost it. Memories blur between what I painted, what I dreamt, and what actually exists. I close my eyes, trying to steady the storm inside. A distant rumble thunder or a train. The windows vibrate. I squeeze my eyes shut. The memory surfaces like a ghost. Me, standing at the edge of a cliff years ago, the wind ripping at my coat, the sea roaring below. I never painted that. I never told anyone. Yet now it feels as real as my heartbeat. A single thought pierces the haze. I need the daylight. I need to see everything in plain view. I rise, dust off my jeans, and step outside. The mist has lifted. Pale light filters through jagged clouds. The world looks ordinary: houses, trees, the silent street. Yet, nothing feels safe. I inhale deeply, letting the chilly air calm my nerves. I force my legs to move forward, toward the distant horizon. My mind, though, drifts back to the studio, to the paintings that shift like living things in the half-light. I promise myself, first light, I'll return. I'll uncover the truth behind that smear, that whisper, even if it means staring into the abyss of my own creation, whatever it takes to reclaim reality. But for now, I walk on unsteady legs into a day I'm no longer sure I'm ready to face. I returned to the studio before sunset, though every fiber of me screamed to stay away. The corridor light flickered, and I paused outside the studio door, steeling myself. In the half-dark, the familiar hum of turpentine and oil paint felt almost comforting. A day of normalcy in a world gone mad. I pressed my palm against the cool wood and eased the door open. The studio greeted me with an almost audible sigh, as if relieved to see me return. I flicked on the overhead lamp. Its yellow glow pooled across the canvases, revealing the room's secrets. The easel that held the whisper, the smudge of red still faintly visible on its stool, the scattered tubes of paint that hadn't been there before. I crossed to the easel and steadied my breath. The painting lay face down, just where I'd dropped it. Little pulsing flecks of dust drifted in the lamplight. I flipped it gently onto its front. The slash across her lips had receded. It was back to the way I'd last remembered it. Shades of grey and violet, the silver smear glinting in her cheekbone. Her expression was serene, watchful, even. I breathed out. Relief washed over me, but only briefly. My rational mind fought to rebuild order, to dismiss yesterday's horrors as nightmares or hallucinations. But the questions nagged. Where did that red smear come from? Why had it changed so vividly? I surveyed the other paintings. If the whisper could change, could they all? My pulse quickened. I moved from canvas to canvas, scanning each surface. At first, everything seemed static, trees unmoved, faces unblinking. Then I noticed it. A tiny curl of black paint on one forest scene that I didn't recall ever applying. I knelt in front of it and traced the curl with my fingertip. It felt slick, like fresh ink. In that moment, the hush of the studio constricted around me. I dropped to my knees and crawled among the canvases, eyes darting for anomalies. My breath grew shallow. On the portrait of an old man wizened, Lindai found another small curl, this one nestled in the corner. Just above the signature I'd scrawled in crimson last spring. Yet the J and W of my initials looked jagged, unfamiliar. I staggered back, and my hand caught the edge of a paint can, sending it rolling across the floor. Its lid popped off, and the deep red pool within leaked onto the wooden boards. My pulse thundered. That was my red cadmium red light. But the pool matched exactly the dark smear I'd seen on the whisper, the same viscosity, the same odor of metal. My hair prickled. I knelt beside the can, dipped a fingertip in the paint, and pressed it against my tongue. No, this was ordinary paint. The metallic tang I experienced yesterday iron was absent here. My mouth recoiled at the taste of oil. I wiped my finger on my jeans and shoved the can aside. My eyes moved restlessly, desperate to escape the creeping dread. Then I saw the pattern. Those tiny curls of black paint weren't random. They formed symbols, strange, angular glyphs that pulsed beneath the surface of my work. I wiped sweat from my brow and crouched lower for a closer look. Each glyph was distinct, yet they all shared a twisted elegance, as if drawn by a steady hand. I ran my finger along the lines of one symbol. It felt carved into the paint, groove and ridge palpable beneath my skin. I sprang up and hurried to my drafting table. I rummaged through a drawer for a sketchbook and pencil that lay buried beneath scraps of charcoal and ink. I dragged the chair forward, opened the book to a blank page, and, with trembling hands, began to copy the symbol. The pencil scratched against the page, marking each jagged corner, each sweeping curve. My breath slowed as my focus narrowed. For 15 minutes I lost myself in the glyph's geometry, ignoring the swirling questions in my mind. Only when my pencil hovered over the final edge did I exhale. I held the sketch up to the light. The symbol resembled a broken triangle, its apex crooked, two sides bowed inward. Beneath it, I'd added my shaky initials and the date. Now, I flipped back through my recent paintings in search of more. Within minutes, I'd catalogued a dozen occurrences on the edge of a stormy seascape, tucked beneath the beard of a self-portrait, hidden in the pattern of a floral abstract. Each glyph sat just outside my conscious memory, as if I'd painted around it in a fugue. But I remembered painting every inch of these canvases, so I thought. My pulse pounded. I snapped the sketchbook shut and stood, pacing. How could these shapes have gotten here? I don't mix black pigment into my palette in pure form. I create deep blacks by layering blues and reds, a method I've refined over years. Yet these glyphs were stamped in thick black, unsmudged, as if carved. The lamp flickered again. Shadows stretched across the studio walls, tracing the contours of the glyphs in my mind. I backed against the far wall, eyes wide. Images of my past work tumbled through my mind, hundreds of paintings, each one now a potential host for these symbols. I pinched the bridge of my nose. My head throbbed. There had to be a logical explanation, a prank. Impossible, I'm alone here. A break-in. Then why no footprints, no other sign? Besides, these symbols occurred even on canvases I haven't displayed in months, stacked in the attic. I forced myself to breathe. I would solve this. I would understand. Fear had no place here. I strode to the corner where I kept old canvases and lifted the tarp that covered them. Dust motes swirled. Under the tarp lay a trove, early works, abandoned experiments, half-finished studies. I lifted one canvas after another, scanning for the black glyph. Each time I thought I'd found relief. No symbol it would emerge, ghostly, lurking in the paint's crevice. I flipped through more. Cityscapes, figure studies, surreal landscapes. The glyph was omnipresent. A cold realization pinched my spine. I must have painted it myself, at some level. An involuntary impulse, perhaps. During those nights I couldn't sleep, when I slumped at the easel and lost track of time and self. I shook my head. No. I would remember such a persistent pattern. Frustration boiled over. I dropped one canvas to the floor and kicked at it. It rotated and hit the wall with a hollow thunk. I raised a clenched fist, ready to strike again, but halted. My knuckles stung, and for a moment, I saw something else. An imprint of the glyphant beneath it, pressed into the wood, a faint fingerprint. I knelt and pressed my fingertip beside the mark. It was my fingerprint, no doubt, and the glyph and dried into the paint, still slightly raised. How did I imprint my finger there? When last night, 2 nights ago, I slumped back against the wall, the studio tilting around me. My mind blurred the hours, folding reality and dream into one. I felt the walls closing in, the paint cans looming, the lamps flickering in some silent countdown. I rose on unsteady legs and crossed to the window. Dusk had deepened into a bruise of purple and black. The world outside was in different cars, gliding past, lights flickering in distant houses. Here, inside, I was trapped in a labyrinth of my own making. I turned back to the studio. If these symbols were my own unconscious signature, a message, To myself, what did they mean? A hidden language, coded into every stroke, every pigment. A warning, a confession, or a curse. I hesitated only a moment before unplugging the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. My heart thundered as I waved a hand in front of my eyes, but couldn't see the shape of my own palm. I flipped my sketchbook open and held it close. Even in darkness, I could make out the pencil strokes. They glowed always at the afterimage seared onto my retina. I traced the symbol once more, slower, each line a tether to the truth. Then I heard it a low murmur, like the rustle of fabric against canvas. My blood froze. I darted around the room, breath catching in my throat. Nothing moved, yet the sound persisted, growing louder, unintelligible syllables, a whisper of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I gripped the sketchbook to my chest and backed into the corner. The glyphs on the walls, on the paintings, on the floor, one pulse with that same murmur, as though tuned to the same secret frequency. My skin crawled. I pressed my back against the wall, shielding my face. The whispers crescendoed, then stopped in a breathless instant. Silence crashed down around me. And then, clear as a single drop of blood on white linen, a word formed in my mind. Remember. My heart slammed against my ribs. Remember what? My hands shook so hard the sketchbook rattled. I closed my eyes tight, summoning every ounce of will. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would unearth the hidden room in the attic where I keep the oldest canvases. I'd discover when I first painted the glyph and why. If this message was meant for me, I would obey. But tonight, the studio felt like a prison, and the glyphs my jailers. I turned, stumbled through the darkness, and fled into the night, clutching my sketchbook like a talisman against the madness creeping in my mind. I slept fitfully in my spare bedroom, the sketchbook clutched to my chest like a fragile relic. When my alarm finally jolted me awake, the edges of the glyph in my mind still shimmered, as though it had printed itself across my brain. I bolted, upright heart hammering, and stared at the ceiling until the room stopped spinning. I dressed in the same paint-splattered jeans and grey tee I'd worn yesterday because everything else felt wrong, and slipped out of the house into the cold dawn. I needed air urgently. The coastal wind whipped at my face, carrying the sharp tang of sea salt. But the metallic undercurrents, the scent of iron lingered somewhere in my memory, refusing to let go. I walked without direction, past shuttered shops and silent sidewalks, until I found myself in the town library. I pushed through the heavy doors and inhaled the familiar musk of aged paper. The librarian gave me a puzzled glance. I was the first visitor so early. I nodded apology and headed for the reference section. I had a theory. If these glyphs held meaning, perhaps they echoed some ancient symbol system. I scanned through volumes. On runes, alchemical signs, occult manuscripts, anything that might explain the broken triangle shape damning my life. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, eyes widening at every arcane illustration. Hours passed. Dust motes drifted through the afternoon light. I sketched, compared, annotated until the symbols in the books blurred into an indecipherable blur. None matched exactly. Some bore faint resemblance to alchemical glyphs for transformation or corrupted runes from medieval grimoires. But this broken triangle, it was unique, personal. Frustrated, I slammed a book shut. My gaze wandered to the towering window. The sun had shifted west. Daylight was fading. I realized I'd ignored everything else. Lunch calls, the small voice of sanity advising me to step away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single text from an unknown number. You painted it. Let it speak. My stomach plummeted. I stared at the message, disbelieving. Who? I rifled through my recent calls and messages. No unknown contacts. No clues. I returned to the reference stacks, searching for camouflage, any sign of a prank. Lovers' quarrel. Friends' sick joke. No one had my keys. No one had access. I bolted from the library, phone pressed to my ear. Detective Monroe. I barked at the voice on the other end. I need to report a break-in at my studio. There was a pause. Then soft, professional calm. Ma'am, our records show no reports on file. Are you sure you called us earlier? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. No, I haven't called yet. But listen, there's something in my paintings. Symbols that shift. I found a message. His voice went quiet. Symbols, a message. I choked on a laugh. Relief, half hysteria. You have to see them. He hesitated. I'll send an officer to your address. Do you feel in danger? I inhaled, and the steady rhythm of my breath anchored me. Yes. I ended the call and sprinted back to my car. On the drive home, the symbols haunted every passing sign, every street lamp. I kept glancing at my phone, expecting another text. Another clue. Nothing, just the empty highway and my frantic thoughts. When I finally pushed open the studio door, the air felt heavier, even suffocating. I flicked on the lights. Everything was neatly in place. Brushes lined up, paint tubes capped, canvases stacked. No sign of intrusion. But I didn't trust appearances. I moved to the center of the room, feet tracing the pattern of cracks in the wooden floor. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the sketchbook, opening to the glyph. I set it on my drafting table, then switched on the overhead lamp. At the far wall, I'd left a blank canvas propped against the boards. It called to me, pulsing softly in my chest. A voice that felt like my own whispered, "Paint." I froze. My hand trembled in midair. I hadn't intended to paint today. I'd come to analyze, to record evidence, maybe even to destroy that cursed canvas. Yet the urge was irresistible. I crossed to the blank linen, picked up a brush, and dipped it into black pigment. The paint felt thick, sluggish, ancient. My breath slowed, each exhale a countdown. I raised the brush to the canvas. The first stroke formed a jagged line. My eyes locked on the broken triangle as it emerged under my trembling control. Stroke by stroke, the symbol took shape identical to the glyph in the sketchbook. I painted each angle, each bend, without conscious thought. My hand knew the way. As I completed the final line, I stepped back and stared. The glyph lay in the center of the white canvas, bold and oppressive. I could almost hear it humming, vibrating in the stagnant air. My pulse pounded. I turned to the sketchbook. The text message notification glowed on my phone. I checked it with a shaking finger. Well done. My heart froze. Whoever sent that message was here inside my studio, watching me paint my own nightmare. I whirled around. The room was silent. My reflection in the window showed gaunt cheeks, haunted eyes. I swallowed hard. Behind me, the painted glyph seemed to darken, its angles dripping in shadows that pooled on the floor. I heard a soft rasp, like fabric dragged across rough wood. I spun on my heel. The stairwell to the attic once, a sealed door stood slightly ajar. A thin beam of light slanted downward. I hadn't touched that door in years. It was locked. I would have remembered opening it. Panic clutched my throat, but curiosity and dread forced me forward. With each step up the narrow stairs, the air grew colder. The whispering followed my soft voices, tangled syllables, half-formed words. I reached the attic threshold and paused, heart hammering against my ribs. The light came from beneath the dusty door at the back of the attic, a door I'd never noticed before. Faded paint peeled from its edges. Symbols were etched into its wood. The broken triangle repeated 3 times in a vertical line. My breath caught. I pressed a trembling hand to the glyph. It was carved, ancient, and pulsating with a dark energy. I turned to my sketchbook and saw, scrawled across the page I'd torn out last night, a word I didn't remember writing: open. And so, with hands shaking like autumn leaves, I gripped the tarnished knob and turned it, unlocking secrets I was never meant to uncover. Ask chat. The door creaks on ancient hinges, each groan a dirge, echoing through the narrow attic. My fingers tremble on the knob as I push it inward, revealing a squalid chamber beyond dust-choked air. Broken floorboards and walls scrawled with charcoal. Symbols identical to the glyph I've painted 100 times. The single bare bulb sways overhead, casting warped shadows that dance like specters on the plaster. I step inside, heart hammering against my ribs, and the door slams shut behind me with a jarring finality. My breath catches. I spin toward the handle locked. Panic flares. My skin prickles as though electrified. Then I notice it. The walls are covered, floor to ceiling, with canvases, hundreds of them piled in haphazard stacks. Every blank side faces me, but I know their secret. I edge forward, careful not to disturb the unstable piles. My boot heel snaps a loose board and I freeze. Silence crashes back, heavier than before. My throat is dry. I press both hands against my mouth to still the rising scream. The only sound is my pulse, drumming in my ears like muffled thunder. I force myself to lean over the nearest stack and brush away a layer of grime. Dirt and powder fall like ash. Beneath, I see color splotches of crimson, violet, silver, my signature pigments. My stomach twists. I drop to my knees and peel back the top canvas. The painting beneath is one I never finished. A leafless tree beneath a blood moon, branches twisting like claws. But over it, someone my hand has painted that broken triangle glyph in thick black strokes. Beneath the glyph, in jagged red, the words "See me" bleed across the sky. My breath hitches. My hand flies to my mouth. I've never painted these words, yet the brushwork is unmistakably mine, wild and unrefined. The paint is still pliant beneath my fingertip. My heart hammers in disbelief. I stagger backward into the wall, which quivers under my weight. The bulb overhead flickers once, twice, then glows steady, revealing more. On every canvas in the room, the same glyph appears, accompanied by a single word or phrase. Remember, suffer, forgive, confess, drown. Each word is written in a different color: red, blue, green, but the glyph is always black, carved into the scene. I slide down the wall, eyes wide with terror, and draw my knees to my chest. My pulse races. Beads of sweat roll down my temples. My lips part, but no sound emerges. My mind reels with 1,000 questions, none of them sane. How long has this been happening? These hidden paintings. When did I make them? When did I mean to reveal them? The whispering starts again, low but insistent, like wind sifting through dead leaves. I press my hands to my ears, but the voices only grow louder, pressing phrases against my skull, paint reveal the truth. I shove myself to my feet, back to the stacked canvases. The floorboards shift beneath me. I dart from stack to stack, eyes searching for an escape, a window, a hatch, anything. There is none, just more paintings, more glyphs, more half-formed words screaming for release. Stumbling, I back against the far wall. My pant leg snags on a nail, tearing. My foot kicks something, a canvas, crumpled like discarded clothing. I lean down, heart pounding, and peel it free. Under the grime, I make out a familiar shape. My own face, eyes wide with fear, painted in shades of grey. Beneath it, the glyph and the word "you" in deep crimson. I reel. My reflection in the canvas seems to watch me, pleading. My knees buckle. The world tilts. I slide to the floor, head spinning, and press my face into my hands. My vision swims. The whispered commands swirl together into a single phrase. Complete it, complete it, complete what? There is no logic here, just an echoing demand, as relentless as the tide. I scrape my fingernails against the floorboards, pulling myself up. The room throbs with expectation. My eyes lock on the nearest blank canvas leaning against the far wall. White and pristine, it mocks me with its emptiness. The whispered mantra reverberates in my mind. Complete it. My feet move before I can think. I approach the canvas, brush in hand. My grip tightens around the handle, knuckles white. A single drop of sweat slides down my brow, landing on the wood. I lift my brush and dip it into the black pigment I tore from the piles below. The first line comes naturally sharp, confident, imbued with decades of instinct. The broken triangle takes form almost instantly. Beneath it, I begin to write, finish. The word flows from my brush, heavy and final. My heart hammers. I press my finger into the wet paint, smearing the letters. I feel exhilarated. Insane, but exhilarated. The whispers swell, triumphant. I step back and sink to the floor, breathing hard. The glyph and the word glow in the dim light, radiating something alive. My mind trembles on the brink of collapse. Then, silence. A distant thunderclap rumbles through the house, shuddering the attic walls. I clutch the canvas to my chest, paint smearing across my jeans. My breaths come in ragged gasps. I close my eyes, willing myself to calm. I think of home, of sunlight on the street below, of mortal things, food, water, air. I think of the phone in my bag, Detective Monroe on the other end, the promise of help. I stand, resolve hardening within me like steel. I will document everything, every painting, every glyph, every hidden canvas. I will unearth the pattern, the meaning, the truth behind these brushstrokes of madness. I cradle the fresh canvas and turn toward the door. But as I step forward, I glimpse movement in the corner of my eye. A single painting I haven't yet pulled from the stack. On it, instead of the glyph, there is only my artist's signature again, unfamiliar, jagged, urgent, almost pleading. My blood runs cold. I realize I haven't been signing my name on any of these secret paintings. I've only painted the glyphs and words. Whoever or whatever painted them, they knew me intimately, and they knew precisely where to hide. I exhale a trembling breath. The whisper returns, softer now. Find me. I grip the canvas tighter, my knuckles whitening. As I step toward the door, I swear to myself, I'll answer that command, no matter the cost. Because the only way to silence this madness is to follow its trail to the final, terrifying truth. The storm outside had gathered by the time I made it back downstairs. Rain drummed steadily against the windows, wind howling like some wounded animal circling the house. My phone lay on the kitchen table, untouched, its screen dark. I hesitated, before picking it up, half afraid another message would be waiting. Nothing, no new texts, no missed calls, no Monroe. I placed it down again, gently, as if it were glass. In the silence, I could still feel the attic door at my back like a weight. The memory of that room, those glyphs, those words pressed on me like a second skin. But something else lingered too, a pull, as if the attic hadn't shown me everything. I paced the hallway, letting instinct lead me. The studio door was open, its light casting long shadows across the floor. I avoided it for now. Instead, I returned to the old blueprint drawer in the hallway closet. The house was built in 1906. I'd inherited it from a distant uncle I barely remembered. A man everyone whispered about, but never discussed in detail. The kind of man who left locked rooms behind and silence in his wake. I dragged out the rolled parchment blueprints and unfurled them across the dining table. Dust rose in a thin plume as I leaned over the faded lines and numbers. My fingers traced the house's outline entryway, kitchen, studio, the long corridor upstairs, attic. But there, just left of the attic stairwell, a wall too wide for insulation, no markings, no labels. My heart stuttered. A hidden room. I grabbed a flashlight and returned to the attic, taking the steps 2 at a time. The air felt colder now. The bulb still swung gently overhead. The glyphs on the walls seemed to breathe in my peripheral vision, but I forced myself to ignore them. I went to the back wall left of the stairwell, the supposed dead end. I ran my fingers across the wood paneling, knocking gently. Hollow, I pressed harder. The panel flexed, just barely. I dropped to my knees and searched the base, and there it was, a tiny notch in the floorboards, worn smooth. With trembling fingers, I pried it open. The panel creaked, then gave way, revealing a narrow crawl space beyond. Dust and darkness spilled out, along with a stench of mildew and turpentine, old paint, old rot, old secrets. I slid inside, the flashlight beam cutting a swath through the thick dark. My breath caught in my throat. The walls inside weren't wooden, they were lined with fabric. Old canvases, stitched together into a shroud that swallowed the room whole. Every inch of this hidden space was covered in paintings, hundreds of tiny works, each no larger than a shoebox lid. Many were unfinished. Some were monochrome, others bursting with color. But all of them shared one thing, a single eye. Sometimes centered, sometimes off to the corner. Sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes bloodshot. Other times serene, always watching. I moved the beam slowly, each eye followed me. I swear to God, I could feel them tracking me like prey. Then I saw it, a mirror leaned against the far wall. Cracked down the center, the glass spider-webbed, but intact enough to show my reflection. I approached it. My face was pale, lips cracked, eyes sunken and bloodshot. I barely recognized myself. But just as I leaned in, just as my breath fogged the glass, something moved behind me. I spun, flashlight jerking to the side. Nothing there, only paintings, watching, waiting. I turned back to the mirror and screamed. The glyph had appeared across my forehead in the reflection, painted black, glowing, pulsing. I touched my skin, nothing. No ink, no burn. But in the mirror, it remained. and beneath the symbol, carved faintly into the glass, were words, "You were never alone." My knees buckled. I dropped to the floor, flashlight spinning away into a corner. The darkness pressed in. I crawled, half blind, fingers searching for something real: wood, rope, paint, anything. Then I touched it. A box, small metal, cool to the touch. I yanked it toward me and flipped it open. Inside lay a roll of photographs, old, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. I held them to the dim light of the flashlight and squinted. The first was a child, no older than 5, standing before a large canvas, smiling, paint-streaked hands, my hands. I flipped to the next, same child, older now, paintbrush clenched in their fist. Behind them, one of the glyphs, painted perfectly, years before I'd ever seen it. Another photo, the attic, unchanged, same paintings, same mirror, same glyphs. Only this photo was dated October 1996. I would have been 9, but I remember nothing. I dropped the photographs and sank into the dust, clutching my chest. My breath came in short gasps. Why had I forgotten? Why had no one told me about this place? The last photo slipped from the stack. I reached for it with numb fingers. This one wasn't of the attic. It was of a hospital room. White walls, a gurney, machines, and me, strapped down, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. Written in blue ink along the border, "She sees what we cannot." The flashlight flickered. Somewhere behind me, a voice whispered, "Paint the final one." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I crawled back out of that room with the photographs, pressed against my chest, and a truth unraveling in my mind like wet canvas. I had painted the glyphs as a child. I had seen something, then something that shattered me. My family hid it, locked it away, locked me away. And now it was waking again, and it wanted me to finish what I started. I barely remember making it back down the attic stairs. I only recall the sensation of my body moving without Willitch steps, stiff, mechanical, like I was being pulled by some invisible thread. The photographs were still clutched in my hand, crumpled slightly from my grip. My flashlight had died halfway down. It didn't matter. I no longer needed light to see what had always been lurking in the dark. I reached the studio, door wide open like it had been expecting me. Everything inside was exactly as I left it. The blank canvas in the center, the sketchbook splayed open to the glyph, and the whispers, low and rhythmic, like breathing just beneath the surface of silence. The box of brushes sat beside the stool. I sat down slowly, placing the photos and sketchbook on the floor beside me. My eyes drifted to the canvas. There was no hesitation now. My hands moved with purpose, not fear. This time, I wouldn't paint the glyph. I would paint the memory. I selected a wide brush, dipped it into raw umber, and laid the first stroke down like a wound across the linen. The smell of paint filled my lungs, heavy, grounding. I didn't think I remembered. Not in words, but in colors, textures, shapes. I remembered the hospital room. I remembered the mirror. I remembered screaming when no one else could hear, the voices whispering from the cracks in the ceiling tiles. I painted the gurney first. Stark metal, leather, straps, the cold tile floor beneath. I washed the background in harsh fluorescent white, like the lights above my bed when the doctors leaned over me with clipboards and thin smiles. I switched brushes, smaller now, and traced the outline of a child's figure curled into herself. mouth open, mid-scream, eyes wide with a terror too vast for words. My own eyes, my own scream, my own terror as I painted. The studio seemed to hum with recognition. The walls didn't whisper this time, they breathed. The very air shifted, moved, gathered around me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I painted the doctors next. Faces obscured by shadows, outlines blurred, monsters draped in white coats. Their hands were gloved, but the gloves bled black onto the floor, a thick, wet brushstroke for the machine beside the bed. EKG wires snaking like vines around the girl's chest. I painted the rhythm, the same beat that echoed in my skull each night since I found the whisper painting. And finally, I painted the window, the one in the hospital room, a small, square pane of thick glass. But instead of sunlight, the world outside was pitch black, and in the darkness, a single eye stared in. Not human, not animal, just watching. I stepped back, chest heaving. The painting was finished. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees, sweat dripping from my jaw onto the studio floor. My hands were covered in pigment red, black, ochre. My vision blurred at the edges. The whispers returned louder this time, but still unintelligible. A language I didn't know, but had always understood. Behind me, I heard the door creak open. I turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, gaunt eyes shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't speak, but something about him felt familiar, like a forgotten photograph or a voice from a half-remembered dream. I stood slowly. "Who are you?" I asked. The man tilted his head slightly. In the half-light, I could see a thin scar across his jaw. His lips parted just enough for his voice to leak out quiet, dry, and certain. "You left me in the canvas." My blood turned to ice. My throat closed. "No," I whispered. "You're not real. You're part of the painting. Your eye was real once," he said, stepping forward. "You painted me out. When they asked what you saw, you lied. You buried me in pigment, in silence, in the glyph." I backed into the stool, nearly falling over. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a child. He nodded slowly. "You were, and they took it from you, your truth. Your voice, your eye." He stepped to the canvas. His gaze ran over the painting, the girl, the room, the eye in the window. "But you've remembered now." The studio shook gently, the bulb overhead swinging. He looked back at me. "So what happens next?" "I don't know," I said, and I didn't. But my body moved again. I stepped forward, fingers trembling, and picked up the brush one last time. I dipped it into black, moved to the bottom corner of the painting, and signed my name. Not the initials I use now, the original, the one I used as a child, J.W. The glyph shimmered faintly behind me, reflected in the studio window, but it didn't scare me anymore. When I turned, the man was gone. Only the canvas remained, and silence, but not empty silence, not hollow like before. This one was full, peaceful, final. I sank to the floor and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the studio felt like mine again, and somewhere inside the layers of paint, memory, and madness, I found myself. 3 days passed, maybe 4. Time became water, slipping between my fingers before I could hold on. I barely ate. I barely slept. The painting, the final canvas, stood silently in the studio, covered now by a white cloth. I couldn't look at it again, not yet. The house felt quieter, not because the whispers had stopped, they hadn't, But because I had stopped fearing them, they were no longer invaders. They were memories, residual echoes, the ghosts of brushstrokes long buried. Beneath fresh paint, I spent my time cataloging everything in the attic and the hidden room. I photographed each canvas, digitized every sketch, scanned the symbols and the strange phrases I'd once painted in some subconscious trance. I laid them all out on the floor of the studio in a spiral, every glyph, every canvas, every word forming a massive, symbolic timeline in the center. I placed the photograph of myself as a child, the one where I stood smiling beside a canvas I no longer remembered painting, and next to it, the photos of me in the hospital, strapped to the bed, screaming dot sometimes. I would sit in the middle of the spiral and stare at them all, and sometimes the walls would shift subtle movements like breathing. The studio had become a living organism. It had always been. I just hadn't noticed, or maybe I'd chosen not to. On the 5th night, the text came again. Unknown number. Are you ready to show them? I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the reply button for a long time before I typed yes. Because deep down, I already knew this wasn't just about recovery or remembrance. This was about truth. Not just mine, but others. The ones who had whispered through the wood, the paint, the mirror dot. So I called the gallery Gallery Lavigny. Downtown, I'd exhibited there once, years ago, back when I was still safe, still ordinary. I wasn't sure they'd remember me, but they did, and they said yes. I didn't tell them what kind of work I would be bringing. I didn't explain that these paintings weren't just art, they were memories, prison cells, messages, testimonies. I gave the exhibit a name, Ghost Echo, a study in madness. The gallery night came fast, too fast. I arrived early, hauling canvas after canvas into the sterile white space. The curators helped without question. Perhaps they sensed it, how fragile the air around these paintings felt, how electric, how haunted. By the time the first guests began trickling in, the room was ready. I stood near the entrance, silent, watching their faces as they wandered. Past the glyphs, the eyes, the endless black triangles carved into canvas like scars on flesh. Some tilted their heads in confusion. Others stepped closer, squinting, trying to make sense of the symbols. But just a few went completely still, as if something had reached out from the paint and touched their throat. A woman in a red scarf began to cry in front of the hospital room. She didn't speak. She just stood there, one hand pressed to her chest, breathing unevenly. When I approached, she met my gaze. Her eyes were wide and shining. "You saw it too," she whispered, "didn't you?" I nodded, and in that moment, I understood. This gallery wasn't just mine. These glyphs, they weren't only mine. Others had seen them. Others had heard the whispers. Others had forgotten, just like me. I returned to the corner where I'd placed the covered final canvas. The curator gave me a glance across the room. He knew this was the centerpiece, the one I hadn't revealed to anyone yet. I stepped forward, took a breath, and pulled the cloth away. A hush rippled through the gallery. Someone gasped. A glass clinked against the floor and shattered. No one moved toward the canvas, but every eye locked on it. The hospital, the girl, the eye, and my original signature, JW, painted boldly in the lower corner, untouched, unapologetic. The gallery lights flickered just once, just enough to make a few people turn toward the ceiling. But I didn't. I kept my eyes on the canvas. I felt it again, that presence, not malicious, not kind, just aware, the glyphs on the surrounding canvases hummed softly. No one else seemed to hear them, or maybe they did in their own way. I walked through the exhibit once more, this time letting my fingers trail across the air above the paintings. Not touching, just acknowledging, bowing my head to each one like they were headstones, because they were. Every glyph was a buried memory, every brushstroke a resurrection. At the end of the night, the gallery was empty. The curators had gone. The lights were dimmed. I stood alone, surrounded by echoes. And then, one last message. Unknown number. You've shown them. Now let go. I smiled, soft, tired, peaceful. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the front doors, stepped out into the night, and let the silence follow me home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the center of the studio cross-legged, surrounded by canvases, paint-stained hands resting on my knees. I watched as the early light crept through the blinds, cutting across the floor like long fingers. It touched the spiral of paintings I'd laid out days earlier, now warped and curled at the edges, like leaves dried by truth. The gallery exhibit had ended hours ago, but inside me, the story hadn't. There were no new messages, no whispers. From the walls, only silence. And for the first time, I didn't fear it. In the silence, I began to remember everything. Not just the glyphs, or the mirror, or the hospital bed. I remembered the moment they told me to stop painting, that it was making me sick. That what I created was wrong, dangerous, unhealthy. They didn't understand what I was painting. I didn't either. Not then. They thought they were helping when they locked the room, burned the canvases, changed the subject every time I asked about my uncle. They thought they were curing me when they forced me into therapy, handed me pills that dulled the visions. They believed they were saving a child from madness, but all they did was hide the truth. And the truth never dies in darkness. Shit just learns to whisper. I stood up and moved to the final canvas again. It felt lighter now, not in weight, but in meaning. It had done its job. It had spoken, but I wasn't done. I found a smaller canvas and touched, clean, unburdened. I placed it on the easel and took a deep breath. This time, I didn't paint glyphs or ghosts or forgotten hospitals. This time, I painted a chair. A simple chair, wooden, worn, bathed in the warm glow of sunrise through a window. Then I added a mug, steam curling softly from the top, a book, open, resting on the seat, a brush, leaning against the wall beside it, and finally, a single word at the bottom corner, stay. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise, a truth. Not every canvas has to bleed. I signed it. Not with initials, not with the name I'd forgotten, but with the name I carry now, Jules Winters. I stepped back and stared at the painting, not as an artist, but as a witness. I realized something, then something that felt like both a wound and a gift. The silence that remained wasn't absence, it was acceptance. Every voice, every whisper, every haunting image, they were parts of me, fractured and rearranged, screaming to be seen. And now, they had been. I had dragged them from the attic of my mind and laid them bare in brush and pigment. I didn't erase them. I understood them, and that made all the difference. Outside, the wind calmed. The clouds began to break, golden. Morning light poured in through the studio window. Dust danced in its warmth, slow and graceful. I didn't need the spiral of paintings anymore. I began to gather them, not to destroy, but to store properly, this time archived, respected. Each canvas now had a title, a purpose. Each ghost had a name. I moved with purpose, with peace. When the last painting was placed gently into its frame, I sat back down in my chair, sipped tea from the mug beside me, and looked at the new canvas once more. It looked quiet, whole, like healing, and somewhere deep inside, in the place where silence had once been, something terrifying. I heard something new, not a whisper, not a glyph, just my own voice, soft and certain. I'm still here. And this time, that was enough.